Hello, everyone. Dr. Ames here. This time, I'd like to talk to you about understanding buyer behavior and the communication process. Here are the learning objectives this time. Um, by the time we're done with this material, you'll be able to describe the four stages of consumer decision making, explain how the decision making process is based on personal involvement and experience, discuss how this brand communication uh, really influences the consumer psychological state and behavior. Um, Recognize that culture is incredibly important in our marketing efforts. Um, in fact, that you will know how to use psychological factors and sociological factors to affect this consumer behavior. And then understand how when we transmit some meaning, if we use a sociocultural perspective, we can really sell things to people. So this underlies the importance of culture too. So much of what we do in promotion. There is a basic decision-making process that consumers go through. The consumer behavior in general is just a term that says these are the activities and the decision processes that individuals go through when they're thinking about a product and service. Or a service to obtain the product, what is the implications of consuming it, and if there's a disposal of the product. Everything about the product really goes into consumer behavior and what the individual does during any given transaction before and after. And so there is a need recognition that has to take place when consumers make decisions. It creates a need state, and this need state says, I've got to respond. It's psychological. Um, and you want to change your current state of affairs to match the desired psychological state that you have in mind. So what we have is that you're reacting to some type of cognitive dissonance that you have. You don't have something that you need, for instance, and we're talking really most of the time about low-level things, although sometimes our needs and wants are quite serious and take a more significant solution. But most of the time, we're reacting as a result of cognitive dissonance. We need something, we recognize that we need it, and then this process of decision making about how to get it and which thing to get and so forth takes place. And along the way, we're thinking of the benefits. We're doing an analysis as an individual consumer. We're thinking about the functional benefits that we might get, the emotional benefits, and all those social display benefits. Um, and then what happens next is that we begin that information search and evaluation of different alternatives to satisfy our want and need. And this certainly always begins with the internal search. We're thinking about products that we can relate to, that relate to the current product or service that we're thinking about. So we're looking for product information in this internal search. And we think back to our personal experiences and prior knowledge. What has happened to us in the past relating to this product? And so these are evoked memories. And these evoked memories, when we start thinking about them, become the consideration set. And this consideration set is just a list of brands that we might consider in any given situation about a product that we need. And so, in other words, we need something, a particular brand. We might immediately start thinking of all the brand names associated with that product. And then we would think of the ones that we have purchased before, and we would start thinking about how it went. Did the product satisfy us, or were we disappointed, and so forth. So this is how it basically works. Remember now, we're all trying to evaluate options that will fulfill some need that we have. And so we have, each of us, various evaluative criteria about product attributes or performance that we want to satisfy. And so we're all different. So some of us want one particular attribute satisfied, maybe a little stronger than others. But we are using all of these sorts of things that we want to use to satisfy our need as evaluative criteria. And marketers simply have to be aware of the various ways people might evaluate their product or service. Um, so they're going to think about the ways that it's going to be used by them, the effort that's going to be required before, during, and after. And then Uh, the end result of this basic decision-making process is a purchase or no purchase. The customer makes a decision. So after we've made a purchase, we always have a post-purchase use and evaluation phase that we all go through. Um, when we think about the business that organizations do, more than half of any given company's current business comes from present customers. And so these are people who have already purchased your product or service and they're satisfied and they're repeat customers. And so they've come back. Now, if you have a dissatisfied customer, they almost never come back. And research really bears this out. So we really have to think about um, customer satisfaction. Certainly, this has to be the end all and be all for marketers, because not only do you have to be successful with your marketing promotion campaign, but you have to pull it off. You actually have to create the value that the customers come to perceive as, oh, yes, this is value. I got a good deal. And so you want those good feelings that come from a favorable post-purchase experience. We want to avoid those negative things that happen when customers aren't satisfied. They develop that cognitive dissonance again. Um, and this can regularly occur after any purchase. It's anxiety, it's buyer's remorse, would be an old way to put it. It's anxiety. A buyer may have spent a considerable amount of mental energy, time, or even money going through and following through and making that purchase. And when they're unhappy, they don't have customer satisfaction, they do suffer a lot of cognitive dissonance. This reflects on the marketer and the promotion campaign itself. And it means that they're a dissatisfied customer and they're not going to come back. Now, there are all sorts of models out there that we could look at to tell us how to make decisions. I don't think we need to do that. What I would like to show you is one very basic model of decision making that looks at really the factors that matter, the factors I've been talking about: a person's basic experiences and a prior use of a product or service, and their level of involvement with this product or service. So we have involvement and we have experience. And either of those conditions can be either high or low. So when we have involvement, let's just look at those conditions first. When we have involvement, we can have either extended problem solving occurring in the mind of the consumer, or we can have limited problem solving. Of course, we would have high involvement when we engage in that extended problem solving. Um, this is related to a very careful internal search that a consumer is performing. They're looking at all the possible things and memories and experiences and evaluating them that they've had in the past. And they're trying to decide which they think might be the best. What was it like to purchase the product? How long did it take? And so forth. They really do engage at a deeper level. But if their involvement is low, then generally the buyer behavior is very limited problem solving. It's not as systematic. It might be more random. It might not be as deeply concentrated. Um, and so consumers who have very limited involvement might just try the first brand that they find they are receptive to that message, and that might be how it works for them. And so you want to engage your consumers, certainly. Uh, get them into some extended problem solving, give them the information they need to do that. And so then we look also to experience, high and low experience. Experience can be defined by brand loyalty, or we could define it in the sense of habit or variety seeking behaviors. So let's talk about habit or variety seeking first. When we have a habit, when it comes to brands and products, it's really a habit means we buy a single brand repeatedly, and it's a solution to a simple consumption problem we have, and we do it over and over all the time, and we don't change our behavior. It's a habit, um, but it's done out of experience. The product seems to solve things, and we don't take it any deeper than that. Not only is our experience low there when we have habit buying, but also our involvement is low. We're certainly not looking for other products. And then the other part of experience is the variety seeking is a little different than a habit. These are people that don't tend to buy the same thing all the time. This is the tendency of consumers to switch randomly all the time among various brands in any given product category. So these are hard consumers to convince to buy your brand. These are hard consumers to convince to develop any real brand loyalty at all. And so they are low in experience because they tend to jump around and have experience that is very limited in many types of products, but no deep experience in any one of them. And consequently, habit or variety seeking behavior also demonstrates some low involvement. And then when we think about brand loyalty, here we have a situation where our experience is high. Um, and brand loyalty often becomes one of the main considerations for any given consumer in their purchase decision. And they will be immediately looking to significant functional, emotional, or those social display benefits that they can get from the product. And if they've gotten it in the past and they have high satisfaction from those purchases and so forth, then they have indeed developed some brand loyalty. They will become your repeat customers. They will become your best customers over time. Now, there's a lot of things going on in the minds of consumers, many key psychological processes. Marketers have to overcome attitudes, and attitudes are just already a predisposition that anyone might have about any given object, person, place, thing, or event. And you have to break through an attitude if it's not favorable and get them to see your product or at least think about it. And so that's why you see such outlandish extremes in marketing, from comparative ads to emotional ads, to humorless ads, to absurd ads that make no sense at all. They're trying to break through a lot of cognitive dissonance, and attitude can be a real strong form of cognitive dissonance. Now, we also have brand attitudes. These are the memories and experiences, involvements we've had in the past when any given product. They're stored in our minds. When we start to think about making a purchase decision, these are the things that pop up in that consideration set of alternatives, and we start thinking about which one was best and all of that. So they're sort of summary evaluations that reflect our preferences for the various products or brands that we've used. In turn, these are influenced by beliefs that we have. Beliefs are like attitudes. We can't always tell what a person's attitude or belief might be because they're held within. But a belief is simply a person's knowledge or beliefs about some object or issue or something. A salient belief is just a very important or significant belief that might affect a person's attitudes to the extent where that becomes a major determinant that is part of the criteria that consumers use when they make a purchase decision. Now, there are all kinds of models as well for, like we have for decision making. We've got them for how you do analysis. The one in the textbook is multi-attribute model. It really means that a person looks at multiple criteria when we're making purchase decisions. And it's a model that says consumers are rating brands against each other in these various categories of criteria. Well, this is no surprise to any of us. And so those times that we've had the most customer satisfaction and we felt like we've gotten the best value proposition out of the whole thing, that is the time that we're going to be susceptible to developing brand loyalty, becoming repeat customers, and indeed responding to any given brand's promotion. So we do a lot of information processing, and we also block out a lot of information because as consumers, we are certainly bombarded a considerable amount with so much information, much more than any of us can handle. And so if a promotional message is going to break through all of that noise and clutter and cognitive dissonance that's out there, then we've got to get them to pay attention to the message somehow. That's why we do see such a variety of approaches. And along the way, we have to be certain and be very careful that we're certain that consumers are going to comprehend the message correctly, and that they take that message exactly as we intend it, not have them develop their own idea of what they think we meant. So we have to be very careful about ambiguity, why we have to keep it simple and direct and very consistent, like I've said earlier. Now, consumers, if we do all those things, may retain that message and pull it up as the evaluation criterion set later on when they become in that purchase decision moment. But consumers produce all kinds of obstacles. There's cognitive dissonance, like I've said, all the time. But if a person has a deeply held belief, they just happen to think that all the products in a certain category are out to cheat you, or all the products in a certain category are not well made, they're all shoddy. Well, it's very hard to get them to change their mind on any kind of deeply held belief. And then, of course, there's the advertising clutter. Competitive brands and more brands every single day mean there are more messages that are competing to get your attention. So of course we use our selective attention and our selective perception, and we ignore most ads. Certainly we do as individuals, but some of them hit us in the right place emotionally or functionally or socially, and we respond and we make a cognitive response. If we get to that point where we might pay attention, then we are beginning that evaluation process. But sometimes, right at that moment when we're doing that evaluation process, we run right into something that challenges our currently held beliefs. And so, right there, again, we've run into another barrier that's in the mind of consumers. And consumers certainly are complex, and we're never going to be able to overcome all barriers. Well, we just have to be smart in who we try to send our messages to. And that's why it's so important that we understand how to target and position ourselves. So there are real limits to understand, to the using of these decision-making models, but it helps us to understand how consumers are thinking, what they might be going through, the processes and so forth, so that our messages are understood in the way we intend them to be, and it's the correct message. We have to realize that research tells us consumers actually use less information as opposed to more information when they're making a purchase decision. So let's think about the implications of that. We can overwhelm them in an ad with too many benefits, too many statistics, too much of this and that, and they simply will block it out at a certain point, even if they're receptive to the message initially. We ought to be careful because we have to realize that attention spans are not long, attention spans are short, and we know now that people use less information and they tend, particularly in American culture, to satisfy and make quicker decisions. So they aren't going to have to spend any mental energy. So we also have to realize, and this is paramount, that consumers are very much social beings, that the meaning of any message becomes much more important than their attitudes that we might be overcoming. If we can make the message encapsulated in a sense that has social meaning for them, that touches on some cultural fabric that they are in tune with, then we can get them to pay attention to our message. So we want to also realize that as social beings, consumers are connected to each other, and they have very specific social identities. They have families, cultures, and more, and all of these things are complicated, and they require us to have some knowledge about what's going on in order to be effective. So we have to take a look at consuming in the real world. What is it in reality out there? Well, it is all about culture, and a culture is a group's characteristic ways of behaving. So in America, culture is more or less the same, but it does vary by region and by ethnicity and so forth. And so we have to be aware of that. We have to be aware that people have values and that values are the underpinnings of culture. And so we don't want to offend people, and we want to associate ourselves only with the positive values and things that are going to resonate with people. We have to remember the things that do resonate with people if we're talking about culture, and that would be things like rituals. So rituals are things, behaviors that are formalized and that are repeated all the time. They involve the use of symbols, and symbols, of course, are very powerful. So at the same time as we realize that these are important tools, we want to include in our messages and so forth, in our positioning themes, when we communicate with consumers, we also have to be careful that we're not ambiguous and also that we don't offend people. We have to be aware that particularly if we just talk about America, that society is stratified, that there is social class and different standing in society. But we can use that knowledge because that helps us define a target segment that contains people that are this age and this income and this education or this profession and so forth. And so the stratification is another way just to understand the market out there. And so we can appeal to that particular segment of it we want. And then, of course, taste. Well, we could have used a lot of words besides taste here, but taste is really a generalized set of preferences, you might say, that consumers have. So that is just some of the things that we're going to see in the real world. And we've certainly got to be aware of family interaction, family dynamics. Consumer behavior is family behavior quite often, and it is complex. And we have to be aware of intergenerational effects that we have. For instance, habit buying, and we've talked a little bit about habit buying as one of the consumer behaviors that we would like to overcome in many instances. Well, often habit buying is just based on family preferences that have been passed down over time. My family, for instance, my parents, my mom used Tide. And when I was growing up and I was younger and starting my families, it always seemed like if I was going to buy detergent, well, why wouldn't I buy Tide? That's an intergenerational habit that's passed on. And that is a reflection of taste and so forth. So these things in culture often do span generations. And we have to look at life stages. People want different products and services at different stages of their life. And so this is no different than the product life cycle that goes through changes over time. So do people go through changes? And certainly they're not going to like the same things their entire lives, although there may be one or two or three few things that are fairly consistent. Most of us change our likes and preferences over time, and that is normal. Well, the point of all this is that marketers in their promotional messages and themes and positioning need to be aware of that and incorporate those messages so they resonate properly with the target segment. Now, certainly, celebrity. This is why we use testimonials with famous people of all types, whether they're sports figures or politicians or whatever they are. But it's harder to predict the impact of these people. But they generally do work. It's not inexpensive. Um, but also, you have to think of what is the celebrity that may be involved in the use of this product and what status might I gain with it. Let me wrap up this discussion by talking about a few other forces that do influence the consumer behavior. Certainly our ethnicity. There is increasing diversity in America. Um, it is the focal point of so much of what's going on in American culture right now. And there's no doubt when you watch mass mediated communications like television, you listen to radio, you do hear messages in different media, different channels directed at very specific ethnic groups, very specific gender groups and so forth. Gender differences do matter. Our society is very patriarchal. Um, we have to be careful not to offend people who have very tightly held feminist views, in other words. At the same time, we're trying to appeal to that patriarchal sort of bent that we have running through society. Politics matters. We have to be careful in our promotions to be careful of certain topics and so forth. Um, because you might find that just as many people really will tune out your message as who will tune it in if you start taking stands on controversial issues. So marketing, promotions, and campaigns do not have to be about anything that's controversial. They certainly do have to be about real world events and ongoing changes in culture and sticking with trends and recognizing trends. So that's why we say other forces that influence consumers include community. And this community often exists more in the minds of consumers than anything. Certainly it is about the geography of where a person specifically lives, but a consumer also has a community in their mind. They're members of various subgroups and so forth. They think about things with their fellow members and their objectives and the things they share, beliefs, and all of those things. Marketers, again, have to remember that. But talking about communities leads us to finally talk about brand communities. Now, these are consumers who are in a consumer segment because they like the same brand. It fulfills their needs and wants. It provides a value proposition. And people within brand communities share a commonality or a shared purpose because they do have that one thing in common. It's the product or it's the service. Okay, folks, that's all I wanted to talk about this time. I'll talk to you again soon.